It's November 1095, and Pope Urban II stands before a massive crowd in Clermont, France. The air crackles with tension as his voice booms across the gathering. What happens next will shake the world for centuries to come. God wills it. The crowd roars back as Urban delivers the most consequential speech of the medieval period. With these words, he launches what would become one of history's most dramatic military campaigns, the First Crusade. But this wasn't just any ordinary call to war. This was a holy mission that would see European knights abandon their comfortable castles, leave behind everything they knew, and march thousands of miles into hostile territory for one prize: Jerusalem. If you're loving this epic tale of medieval warfare and religious fervor, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with fellow history enthusiasts. We're just getting started on this incredible journey. Long before Urban's famous speech, storm clouds had been gathering in the east. The year was 1071, and at a place called Manzikert, everything changed. The mighty Byzantine Empire, which had stood as Christianity's eastern shield for centuries, suffered a crushing defeat that sent shockwaves across Europe. The culprits? The Seljuk Turks, a group of nomadic warriors from Central Asia who had embraced Islam and carved out a massive empire with the edge of their swords. These weren't your typical desert raiders. The Seljuks were organized, fierce, and hungry for conquest. They had already captured Baghdad in 1055, making themselves the new powerhouses of the Islamic world. Emperor Alexios I of Constantinople found himself in a nightmare scenario. His empire's armies were scattered, his borders were shrinking, and Turkish horsemen were practically knocking on his palace doors. Swallowing his pride, he did something unprecedented. He sent desperate letters to the West, begging for help from his Christian brothers. Little did Alexios know that his plea for a few mercenaries would unleash the largest military expedition Europe had ever seen. When Urban's words spread across Europe, the response was electric. Knights who had spent their lives fighting each other suddenly found a common cause. But this wasn't just about helping distant Byzantium. This was about reclaiming the Holy Land, walking where Christ had walked, and winning salvation through sword and sacrifice. The army that assembled was truly massive for its time. 70,000 souls ready to march into the unknown. Leading this incredible host were some of France's most powerful nobles, men who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Among them stood Adhemar of Le Puy, the papal representative, and Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, a grizzled veteran who had already proven himself in battles against Muslim forces in Spain. But here's where things get interesting, and slightly comedic. When this enormous army arrived at Constantinople, Emperor Alexios probably wished he had never sent those letters. Imagine expecting a few hundred mercenaries and instead getting 70,000 hungry, armed, and very enthusiastic warriors camping outside your capital city. The Crusaders expected Alexios to feed them, supply them, and lead them into battle. Alexios, meanwhile, was more concerned with getting them out of his territory as quickly as possible. The cultural clash was immediate and awkward. These Western knights, with their heavy armor and direct approach to warfare, must have seemed like barbarians to the sophisticated Byzantines. In a move that would later cause endless problems, Alexios demanded that the Crusader leaders swear loyalty to him and promise to return any conquered territories to the Byzantine Empire. One by one, these proud nobles, men who had never bowed to anyone, knelt before the emperor. Godfrey of Bouillon was the first to take the oath, and the others reluctantly followed. With this uncomfortable alliance secured, Alexios quickly shuttled the Crusader armies across the Bosphorus into Asia. The real adventure was about to begin. The Crusaders' first major target was Nicaea, a city that held deep significance for Christians. It was here that the famous Council of Nicaea had met centuries earlier. But by 1097, it had become the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate, a symbol of Turkish power that needed to be broken. When the Crusader army arrived on May 14, 1097, the siege began with typical medieval brutality. But Kili Arslan, the Sultan of the Seljuks, wasn't about to let his capital fall without a fight. 2 days later, his army came thundering across the horizon, ready to crush these Western invaders. What followed was one of those battles that could have changed history. Picture the scene: Turkish horse archers, masters of mobility and precision, facing off against European heavy cavalry, the medieval equivalent of tanks. The clash was fierce, brutal, and decisive. When the dust settled, Kili Arslan was retreating with heavy losses, shocked by the size and determination of the Crusader force. The siege dragged on for over a month until the Turkish garrison finally surrendered on June 18th. But here's a detail that shows the complex politics of the crusade. The Frankish warriors were forbidden from looting the city. You can imagine their frustration. Fortunately, Alexios sweetened the deal by financially rewarding the Crusaders, proving that even in holy wars, money talks. At the end of June, the Crusader army began one of the most grueling marches in military history. They were heading through Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, a land that would test every ounce of their faith and endurance. Smart tactical thinking led them to split into two more manageable groups, one led by the Normans, the other by the French. The plan was simple. They would reunite at Dorylaeum and continue their march together. But as every military commander knows, no plan survives contact with the enemy. On July 1st, the Normans, who had pushed ahead, suddenly found themselves surrounded by Kili Arslan's army. The Sultan had learned from his defeat at Nicaea and wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. The Normans quickly formed a defensive circle, protecting their supplies and the non-combatants who had followed them on this holy journey. Picture the scene: a few thousand Christian warriors, surrounded by Turkish horse archers in the scorching Anatolian sun, desperately sending messengers to their French allies for help. The Turkish tactics were brilliant and terrifying. Their horse archers would gallop in, unleash a hail of arrows, then wheel away before the heavy cavalry could respond. It was like being attacked by deadly ghosts. They were everywhere and nowhere, dealing death from a distance while staying just out of reach. But then, just when things looked hopeless, the French contingent arrived. The sight of reinforcements thundering over the horizon must have been one of the most beautiful things the beleaguered Normans had ever seen. The Turks, who had expected an easy victory against isolated enemies, suddenly faced a united Crusader army. They chose discretion over valor and fled the field. From that point on, the Crusaders' march through Anatolia was unopposed, but that doesn't mean it was pleasant. Kili Arslan had implemented a scorched earth policy, burning and destroying everything in his army's path. It was the middle of summer, the heat was merciless, and the Crusaders found themselves marching through a wasteland with little food and even less water. Men and horses began dropping from exhaustion and thirst. The proud army that had set out from Constantinople was becoming a trail of suffering humanity. Whenever they found anything to loot or pillage, they did so without hesitation. Holy mission or not, survival came first. The leadership situation was becoming increasingly tense. With no single commander in charge, different nobles began asserting their authority, leading to disputes and power struggles that would plague the crusade throughout its duration. After months of grueling travel, the Crusader army finally reached Antioch, the great city that stood halfway between Constantinople and their ultimate goal of Jerusalem. If Nicaea had been a significant prize, Antioch was the crown jewel, extensively fortified, strategically crucial, and absolutely vital to control if they hoped to reach the Holy Land. But Antioch presented a problem that would test the Crusaders' resolve like nothing before. The city was enormous, its walls seemingly endless, and the Crusader army simply didn't have enough troops to surround it completely. This meant that while they could besiege parts of the city, Antioch could still receive supplies and reinforcements. On October 20th, 1097, the siege began. What followed was 8 months of medieval warfare at its most brutal and grinding. This wasn't the quick, glorious victory that many Crusaders had envisioned when they took up the cross. By January, the attritional siege had taken a horrific toll. Hundreds, possibly thousands of Crusaders were dying of starvation. The army that had once numbered 70,000 was melting away. Not from battle wounds, but from hunger and disease. Men who had survived the journey from Europe, who had endured the hell of the Anatolian march, were dying within sight of their goal. Relief came in March when a small English fleet arrived with supplies, along with improved foraging systems that eased the desperate situation. But even as the Crusaders' situation improved, their enemies were organizing. Kerbogha, a powerful Seljuk commander, was raising a massive coalition from southern Syria northern Iraq, and Anatolia. His goal was simple: crush the Crusaders at Antioch and end this Western invasion once and for all. Back at Antioch, Bohemond of Taranto was working on a plan that would go down in Crusader legend. He had been negotiating with Firuz, an Armenian commander who controlled a section of the city's walls. Bohemond convinced the other Crusader leaders that if Antioch fell, he should keep it for himself, a promise that would cause problems later. On the night of June 2nd, Firuz helped Bohemond and a small party enter the city. Once inside, they opened a gate, and horns sounded across Antioch. The city's Christian majority, who had been waiting for this moment, opened the other gates, and the Crusaders poured in. What followed was a sack that exemplified the brutal reality of medieval warfare. The Crusaders killed most of the Muslim inhabitants, and in the confusion and bloodlust, many Christian Greeks, Syrians, and Armenians also died. It was a victory, but it came with a terrible price. But the Crusaders' celebration was short-lived. Just 1 month later, Kerboga's 40,000-strong army arrived and surrounded the city. The hunters had become the hunted. For 4 days, from June 10th onwards, waves of Kerboga's men attacked the city walls from dawn to dusk. The Crusaders, who had just captured Antioch, now found themselves trapped inside it, facing an army twice their size. Morale plummeted. Defeat seemed certain. The Franks even tried to negotiate surrender terms, but Kerboga refused. It would be total victory or total destruction. Then, on June 28, 1098, something extraordinary happened. At dawn, the Franks marched out of the city in 4 battle groups to face Kerboga's massive army. It should have been suicide, but sometimes in war, discipline matters more than numbers. The Muslim army's discipline collapsed, and they launched a disorderly attack. The result was devastating. With very few casualties, the Crusaders routed Kerboga's army, sending them fleeing from the battlefield. This is exactly the kind of incredible historical drama that makes studying medieval warfare so fascinating. If you're enjoying these tales of courage, strategy, and survival, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic historical content. Following their victory at Antioch, the Crusaders faced a new problem: success. Bohemond asserted his claim to Antioch, but not everyone agreed. The result was months of arguing, while their ultimate goal, Jerusalem, remained unconquered. During this delay, disaster struck again. A plague broke out, killing many in the army. Horse casualties were severe, leaving the Crusaders with even fewer mounted warriors. Worse, the local Muslim peasants refused to supply the Crusaders with food. The rank-and-file Crusaders, the minor knights and soldiers who had endured years of hardship, became increasingly restless. They threatened to continue to Jerusalem without their squabbling leaders. Finally, at the beginning of 1099, common sense prevailed, and the march restarted, leaving Bohemond behind as the first prince of Antioch. As the Crusaders proceeded down the Mediterranean coast, they encountered little resistance. Local rulers, seeing this battle-hardened army approaching, chose diplomacy over warfare, providing supplies and safe passage rather than facing these veteran warriors in battle. The Crusader forces began to grow again as Robert Curthose and Tancred agreed to become vassals. But time was running out. At Jerusalem, political changes were occurring that would complicate their final assault. The Fatimids, who controlled Egypt, had recaptured Jerusalem from the Seljuks and attempted to make a deal with the Crusaders. They offered freedom of passage to any Christian pilgrims to the Holy Land, but only if the Crusaders didn't advance into Fatimid territory. For the Crusaders, who had come so far and sacrificed so much, this was unacceptable. The Fatimid governor of Jerusalem, Iftikhar ad-Dawla, knew what was coming. In a move that would prove strategically sound but morally questionable, he expelled all of Jerusalem's Christian inhabitants, removing potential allies of the approaching Crusaders. On June 7th, the moment every Crusader had dreamed of finally arrived, they could see Jerusalem in the distance. Many warriors wept upon seeing the city they had journeyed so long to reach. After years of marching, fighting, and dying, the holy city lay before them. But the reality of their situation was sobering. The countryside around Jerusalem was arid, lacking in water and food supplies. There was no prospect of relief or reinforcement. By the time they reached Jerusalem, the Crusader army had been reduced to about 12,000 men, including only 1,500 cavalry. Unlike at Antioch, there was no possibility of a long siege. They lacked the troops, supplies, and time. Instead, they resolved to take the city by assault, a desperate gamble that would either crown their crusade with glory or end it in disaster. Godfrey and Tancred made camp to the north of the city, while Raymond established his position to the south. On June 13th, the Crusaders launched their first assault on Jerusalem's formidable walls. But this attack revealed a critical problem: the divisions in leadership that had plagued the crusade from the beginning. Many Crusaders didn't participate due to these ongoing disputes, severely weakening the assault. Those who did attack managed to reach the walls with ladders and engaged in fierce fighting. Picture the scene: armored warriors climbing siege ladders while defenders above dropped stones, poured boiling oil, and shot arrows down at them. The men who climbed the walls fought with desperate courage, but they were too few and too isolated. One by one, the Crusaders who had scaled the walls were killed. Seeing their comrades fall, the rest of the attacking force retreated. The first assault had failed spectacularly. After this failure, the various leaders finally put aside their differences long enough to organize a proper meeting. They agreed that a more concentrated, coordinated attack would be required. But they needed time to prepare properly. Fortune smiled on them on June 17th when a party of Genoese mariners under Guglielmo Embriaco arrived. These skilled engineers brought not only expertise, but, more critically, supplies of timber needed to build proper siege engines. In the arid landscape around Jerusalem, finding suitable wood had been nearly impossible. Then came news that changed everything. A Fatimid relief army had set off from Egypt. Suddenly, the Crusaders were racing against time. They had to take Jerusalem before this relief force arrived, or they would find themselves trapped between the city's defenders and a fresh enemy army. The final assault on Jerusalem began with this grim knowledge driving every Crusader forward. This was their last chance: succeed now or face annihilation. Raymond's troops attacked the south gate, while the other contingents focused on the northern wall. The coordination that had been lacking in the first assault was now present. Every man knew that failure meant death or slavery. On the northern side, the Crusaders managed to scale the walls and began capturing sections of the fortifications. The speed and ferocity of their assault caused panic among the defenders. When medieval armies started to break, the collapse could be sudden and total. The defenders soon abandoned the walls, allowing the Crusaders to pour into the city. After years of struggle, Jerusalem's walls had finally been breached. The defenders who could retreat fled to the Temple Mount, pursued by Tancred and his men. There, in the shadow of one of Islam's holiest sites, they formed up for their last stand. The final battle for Jerusalem was about to be decided in the most symbolic location possible. When the city's defenses finally crumbled, the Crusaders stormed through Jerusalem with years of pent-up frustration and religious fervor driving them forward. What followed was a massacre that shocked even by medieval standards. Muslims were killed indiscriminately, and Jewish inhabitants who had taken refuge in their synagogue died when the Crusaders burned it down. The slaughter continued throughout the day, staining the streets of the holy city with blood. Iftikhar ad-Dawla, the commander of the garrison, managed to strike a deal with Raymond, surrendering the citadel in return for safe passage to Ascalon. At least some lives were spared in this final negotiation. Jerusalem had fallen. The First Crusade had achieved its ultimate objective. On July 22nd, a council convened in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to establish governance for Jerusalem. Godfrey of Bouillon was elected leader, but in a move that showed both humility and political wisdom, he refused to wear a crown of gold in the city where Christ had worn a crown of thorns. Instead, he accepted the title Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. With their pilgrimage complete, the majority of Crusaders now considered their duty fulfilled and returned home to Europe. Only 300 knights and 2,000 infantry remained to defend the city and the new kingdom of Jerusalem. Many warriors had already departed before reaching Jerusalem, and many others had never left Europe at all. When news of the Crusade's success reached the West, these stay-at-homes faced mockery from their families and threats of excommunication from the Pope. Meanwhile, those who had survived the incredible journey to Jerusalem were treated as heroes. The First Crusade had accomplished something that seemed impossible when Pope Urban first called for it in 1095. A diverse army of European Christians had marched thousands of miles through hostile territory, overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and established Christian kingdoms in the heart of the Muslim world. But this success came at an enormous cost. Tens of thousands had died along the way, entire populations had been massacred, and the religious divide between Christianity and Islam had been deepened and militarized in ways that would echo through history. The Crusade marked the beginning of a series of military campaigns that would continue for centuries as Europeans sought to maintain control of the Holy Land. It played a crucial role in shaping European identity, reinforcing the concept of Christendom and establishing patterns of East-West conflict that would influence international relations for generations. The First Crusade was more than just a military campaign. It was a collision of civilizations, a test of faith, and a demonstration of what people will endure and inflict when they believe God is on their side. The warriors who took up the cross in 1095 could never have imagined the full consequences of their actions. But their courage, brutality, and determination changed the world forever. There you have it, the complete incredible story of the First Crusade. From Pope Urban's speech in Clermont to the bloody streets of Jerusalem, this epic tale shows medieval warfare at its most dramatic and consequential. If you loved learning about this pivotal moment in history, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share it with your fellow history buffs, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the past. What other medieval campaigns would you like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest historical adventures.